Welcome to Malachi's Message Toxic Mold Sex Story Series, co-hosted by the co-founders of Malachi's Message, Emily Rochelle and Elizabeth Cripe. Here we will be interviewing and hearing from people who have been through mold. We hope that this helps others feel not alone, not crazy, and that it gives them the strength, hope, and resources that they need to continue on in their journey.
Welcome to Toxic Mold Sucks YouTube Stories and Malachi's Message YouTube channel. I am Emily Rochelle. I am the co-founder and board chair of Malachi's Message. Today, we are joined by Elizabeth Cripe. She is the actual other co-founder of Malachi's Message, and she is the executive director. So she is the one running the foundation and making all these amazing fundraisers, and everything that you see is her on this foundation. And more importantly, she is one of my nearest and dearest best friends. And today she's going to share her story and how this all came to be. Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming on to share your story today.
Of course, I'm so excited.
Before you go into your mold story, can you tell people a little bit about what your life was like before y'all ever experienced mold?
Feels like a dream to even think back that far and to think that life existed. But my husband and I are very social people. We hung out with friends a lot. We lived on an acre property out in the country. We lived in California at the time, and we would have bonfires every weekend. We'd have friends come over and barbecue and hang out. My daughter, who was a toddler at the time, every day we would either go for a run or a walk, in her little stroller. And if she wasn't with me, I'd run by myself at least like 3 to 5 miles a day. Loved running. It was like my go-to for just everything. I played basketball a lot. We were just outside a lot. We loved being outside. At one point, I remember I was teaching full-time. I was pregnant full-time. Well, I guess you can't be pregnant half-time, but I was pregnant, I was teaching and working full-time and in school full-time and still had energy. Like, I remember thinking that was so weird. How did I do all of that? Looking back now, I would do that, come home, make dinner for my husband. We would hang out. I would grade papers, watch a show with him, and then go to bed, wake up early the next morning, make him breakfast, and he'd have to be up by 5 a.m., right? Make him breakfast, get our kid ready, bring him to school. Like, it was insane, but it didn't feel insane at the time. And now looking back going, I don't know who that person was or how they did all of that anymore, but it was great. Like, we really didn't have a lot of cares in the world. We had a great piece of property. We had a great life. We had great friends. We went to like an amazing church at the time. So we really loved life, and we were very full of life.
I think what you just mentioned about how you don't remember that person anymore. And I think a lot of people feel that way once they go through mold because their health changes. With that said, can you kind of go into your mold story and what happened to you and your family?
Yeah, I can. We lived in California at the time, and there was a massive drought happening. So my husband, being the amazing man he is, said I have to provide for my wife, my daughter, and I was pregnant at the time, and very high risk pregnancy. And he said, we need to go into a trade where I know I can provide for you. So he went to line school to be a power lineman, not the football lineman, right? And he got a job after he was done school in Texas as an apprentice. And so we said, okay, let's go. We packed everything up in 2 weeks, sold everything we had, moved to Texas. And we heard that everything, was always bigger in Texas. We learned that, unfortunately, everything is bigger in Texas, not just the bugs, not just the heat, right? So, and I'm saying this, I love Texas now. We're back in Texas, love it. But we moved here about a year in, actually almost to the day, a year. We moved into a 2-bedroom apartment. We were originally in a studio apartment. We had our second daughter and thought we need something bigger. We found an apartment that was in our price range. Thought, great, we're going to give our kids a better life. We moved in December 1st, 2016. And between December 1st, 2016 and July 9th, 2017, hell happened is the easiest way to describe it. Literally like hell on earth. We had over 100 doctor's appointments between the 4 of us. I was sent to the ER multiple times for my throat closing. My daughters, who were biddies at the time, and I didn't know anybody. At one point, I had to call my boss, who I just barely gotten to know, and said, hey, I'm at the doctor. My throat is closing. I know nobody. Can you come get my kids? And they repeatedly saw mommy get taken away in ambulances, to the point that my youngest I would go to the store and she'd grab my leg and be like, Mom, are you going to come back? And I hated it, right? But we didn't know what was happening. We had no clue. My daughter who was 3 at the time. She's incredibly intelligent. She started to not be able to form sentences. She would get so mad that she would start yelling words that weren't even actual words, but in her head they were, and she could not understand why Mom and Dad could not understand that she was trying to tell me that there was a bug on the couch, but I could not comprehend anything that she was saying. She started to get bloody noses literally almost daily. Her hair started to fall out. It would just come out in clumps. She'd go to the shower and her hair would just come out in clumps. And I remember her asking me, Mom, is this normal? Do all kids lose their hair? And we were desperate. We saw specialist after specialist. We saw doctor after doctor. We saw a neurologist. We saw an ENT. I mean, the list goes on because I wanted to know what was wrong with my children. And the way I knew to do that was to go ask doctors. So I thought I was doing everything I needed to do. It got to the point where both my daughters shared a room and they were both hallucinating. I would put them to bed, and a few hours later, they would be wide awake looking at something. And I'd say, why are you awake? Mom, look, it's over there. And there's nothing in the room. She would literally be exhausted. She would sleep for 12 hours, have to take a 4-hour nap in the middle of the day, and just be lethargic. And she would have no energy to go outside and play. And she was like I said, we were outside all the time. She was a very, very active child. My youngest, who was 1, who was starting to form sounds and words and everything. When we moved into this apartment, that changed entirely. She stopped talking. She stopped making sounds. She stopped trying to make sounds. She just completely stopped progressing in any verbal skills whatsoever. She started walking into walls. So she had neurological issues where she would literally walk into a wall. She would trip over thin air to the point where she got kicked out of daycare. I was working at a daycare at the time, and she got kicked out of daycare because they said she was too much of a risk to herself and the other children because the teachers never knew when she was going to fall or walk into something, which was terrifying. So we saw neurologists repeatedly that said everything seemed fine. They couldn't figure out what was going on. We had tubes put in just in case. ENT said she was fine, but just in case it was that, we put tubes in. We had her vision checked. Everything was fine, 20/20 vision. So we started to frantically, try and figure out what was happening. The emotional turmoil that you go through as a parent there, I didn't realize how sick I was. My husband didn't realize how sick he was. My husband ended up having surgery on both wrists by the time we were done with this experience. I was told I need a full hysterectomy, which I don't need. We found out after, but they couldn't figure out where the pain was coming from that constantly sent me to the emergency room. I had so many digestive issues. I was told I had gastritis and a lot of other autoimmune conditions. And it was horrible. I remember at one point my entire back broke out in hives for a month straight, not exaggerating, an entire month where I could do nothing to soothe these huge things that were popping up all over my back constantly. And my husband couldn't figure it out. We started to get angry with each other, which were fairly calm people. We hold our own, we're very independent, but we never yelled at each other. We were yelling at each other all the time, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. I saw my allergist the 3rd time my throat closed, and he said, there's got to be something in your environment. He said, we are giving you the smallest doses. I was getting allergy shots at the time. He said, we're giving you the smallest doses we can even give a child, and your throat just closed. There's got to be something in your environment. So that night I went home. My husband was 3 days out of surgery, both wrists still wrapped. My daughter got up from dinner to go to the bathroom and slipped and fell. And we realized the air conditioning unit in the girls' bathroom was leaking. So my husband went and looked and said, there's got to be something wrong here. He goes, hang on, let me check the other vents. And at this time, we genuinely knew nothing about mold, right? Like, we thought it grew on your food. In my house growing up, unfortunately, it grew on your food. You cut it off and you ate the rest of the food. So in my mind, mold wasn't this thing that you really needed to worry about. He looked into vents and we just saw growth of this stuff everywhere. We looked in our girls' room where they were having the hallucinations, and you could literally see it on the vents surrounding it, growing out of the walls, growing out from around the windows. And I remember thinking, this probably isn't okay. So from there, we pursued, talking to our landlords about it, which did not turn out well. And we finally hired an inspection company by ourselves thankfully, now knowing the laws in Texas, right? If the leasing agency had done it, we wouldn't be able to see the results. So I'm really grateful at least we had the sense to do that. And I remember the girls and I left because I'm so sensitive. We came back to my husband bandaged and the inspector standing outside the apartment. And the only thing he said after introducing himself was, I'm going to highly suggest that you leave and don't look back. And my husband and I quickly had an ESP conversation and we said, okay, that's what we have to do to keep our family literally alive, because if I had gone back in there, I would have been done. Like, it's no joke when your throat closes, right? And now I know I have an autoimmune condition where epinephrine actually inflames the condition more. So if I had EpiPenned myself again, it wouldn't have helped me, it would have made it worse. So we quickly called family. My parents flew my daughters and I out of state. My husband was still an apprentice, so he had to stay. So he stayed and we were essentially homeless for 4 months. He slept on buddies' couches. He slept in his truck for a while. He had to go to physical therapy still. And for 4 months, he bounced around to where he could, because we had, I think, $111 in our account the night that it happened. So he couldn't afford a hotel. And we went and slept on our friend's couch and air mattress that night and flew up the next day. And it was, you don't expect it, right? Like, I remember my daughter coming up to me and pulling my sleeve and being like, Mommy, can I at least go in and get my stuffy? Like, from when she was born, the stuffy that she loved in her blanket. And I had to say, no, you can't. Like, she couldn't go back in and get the favorite thing that was her comfort object when she just lost everything. So it was really, really hard. Yeah, it was hard.
I had gone into your complex with my dad. I told you this.
Right.
Right?
Yes, right.
And
Yeah, you did.
My dad was looking at renting an apartment in your same complex. And I only found this out later when you and I started talking. And I saw mold all around the vents in their model home apartment and pointed that out to the lady. And she was like, that's not mold. And I was like, oh, it's not? What is it? She's like, that's just dust. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. No, that's mold, and I told her. But apartment complexes are just so bad. They will call mold anything other than mold. But you went from being athletic, outdoorsy, active all the time. I mean, the super energetic human being that was teaching and getting up early, good at going to bed late, to now having your throat closed, ending up in hospitals. You lost your ability to exercise. Is that true too?
Yeah, I couldn't. I could barely go up a flight of stairs. Not exaggerating, like carrying my daughters, and they wanted to go to the zoo one day. And I remember not being able to make it. Like, I could get through the day, but by the time we were done, my entire body was swollen and I could not function for 3 days. It was bad. Like, I couldn't do anything. And we'll talk about this later a little bit, but I'm really big on grief in that aspect, right? Like, that it's so hard because you lose the person that you've gotten to know and that you're so used to and that you're confident in, and it's your identity. And now you're literally looking, and it's like you're looking in a mirror and going, I don't even recognize the person that's looking back at me. Yeah. I feel like I have to introduce myself like, hey, do you know this is who you really are? And it's hard, and it's hard to do it while you're trying to help your kids and help your husband and accept help, which is really hard to even accept help at that point for people that wanted to help us. Our church back in California really stepped up. And by the time we got there, within 24 hours, all my girls had entire new wardrobes. People at this church gave them all new clothes, all new toys. I mean, we went to California with 2 bags and we flew back with 8. And most of it was stuff that people had just given my kids. And so it's hard to accept that help though, when you're used to, I've worked since I was a sophomore in high school. I've always held the job. I've always taken care of myself. And so to have to then accept help because you genuinely need it for your family to have sustenance, it's hard. Like, it's really, really hard.
But it's so good though to allow people to help you, because people do want to help and they feel good helping somebody, when they can. And so it's hard whenever a strong person like you, who's worked your entire life, who's never needed help ever, to finally be the one that needs help, to actually go out and ask and to ask for help because of mold, a topic that most people have no clue is, a dangerous substance that injures people every single day, left and right. People just aren't aware of it because we've normalized it as a society that it's normal inside homes, and it's not. It's it's a toxin, and it can not only do everything it did to you, and now it's transformed your life because you now have long life injuries and limitations because of it. Are you even able to run today, Elizabeth?
No, no, we've had spurts in my healing process. Because I remember the first time I think I called you before I called my husband with that one, and was like, I was able to run a half mile today, like, this big thing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I was just excited. I was able to run a half mile. What on earth is going on? But so from that now, right, like we found out after finding this unicorn doctor in California who, I'm not allowed to mention their name, but she diagnosed me with mast cell activation syndrome and PCOS and celiac, and that I'm anemic. So, and all of those are very incredibly accurate. So she was able to pinpoint all of my issues, all of my allergies. She cleaned up my gut first and then worked with me. And now I'm able to, at least, my family loves national parks. We always have. My daughter's goal by the time she's 18 is we're going to hit every national park, including Denali, which will be interesting. But so I'm able now, right? Like I'm able to go on a hike through a national park for half a day. And I know that I'm going to have to rest the next day, but it's not going to destroy me where I'm out for a week. If I have a really bad mast cell flare up, it tanks me. And my husband and I both know this. And I know I've texted him like, hey, I'm not going to get a lot done today because I just had a really severe flare up to my husband's body wash with walnut shells in it. But it's different. My family's adjusted. We're not allowed to have food in our home that I can't eat or touch. There are certain foods that still by touch trigger my throat closing. And with epinephrine not being beneficial for me, it's really tricky to calm my body down when my throat does close. So it's tricky. It's changed. I can't go on retreats. I'm a believer, and I would go on women's retreats at the time with our church, and I can't do that anymore because chemicals and scents will trigger my mast cell flare-ups. So it's a huge adjustment in life. I would never be able to go back into a classroom. I taught high school students that had gotten kicked out of high school. And, unfortunately, one of the realities is they love to wear cologne and perfume or body lotions. And so now I've had to walk through, I'm not ever going to be able to do that again. And it's hard. And it's really, really, it's hard. Like we go to a church and we have to figure out which service has the least amount of elderly people because they like perfume. And it's not anything against them. Everybody has to live their life. We're the ones that have to adjust. And we don't think we're victims of it. We've just learned that if we want to have a high quality of life for me and then for our family, we make those adjustments. My girls know, man, they're the cutest things. You know them, but we'll walk in somewhere and they'll be like, oh, I'm sorry, we can't go in there. And I'm like, what? They're like, Mom, somebody's eating pineapple in there. You can't go near pineapple. And they'll turn and walk out. But it's just a lot. It's a lot of adjustment, a lot of doctor's appointments still, a lot of airfare for us because we live in Texas now. But I'm grateful. I'm probably more grateful for the life I have now than I was before mold, because we have had to see the realities of how precious life really is. And I know you know this from your experience, but to see how precious life is and to see what really matters and what doesn't matter anymore, and to see my kids heal. My daughter had to wear glasses after mold because it impacted her vision, and she's now fine. Like she doesn't have to wear glasses. My other daughter still has some issues and she'll forever be chemically sensitive to anything. And she has permanent allergies, right? But we're healing, and we're at the point now where I'm able to help run Malachi's message. 3 years ago, there's no way I could have taken on this even part-time, but I'm able now. And that's a gift, right? Like my life is a gift. My girls' lives are a gift. My husband choosing to fight for us and choosing to move literally heaven and earth to make sure we have everything that we need to heal. I don't take that for granted because I know not everybody has that. So it's been really interesting to see how mold has sucked the life out of us, but it's also given us life in a very new way.
When you found out it was mold, because like most people, they're like, what do you mean mold? Because we all thought that mold is just an allergen and causes, sinus-like issues, not brain damage and organ failure and muscle spasms and heart, just everything you can even imagine, mold can do.
Yeah.
When you found out it was mold, how did you feel? What were your thoughts?
relief that we had an answer was my first thought. Well, my first thought was a lot of words I'm not going to say on camera, but then relief, like we have an answer, so we can at least figure out what it is, because I didn't know what it was still, but I trusted the inspector, and I trusted that what they were saying was right, because I couldn't think that anybody in their right mind would say you should leave and not come back. And we knew something was wrong. So relief. And then the next 2 years was just a journey of education. It was a journey of diving into journals, watching as many videos as I could in between, you know, being sick and trying to care for our family. But it was just trying to get information and trying to connect with other people that have been through it, and trying, you know, we found a doctor that kind of helped, but not really. And then we found this doctor, and I remember going, oh, this is what mold is. I mean, we interviewed my parents a few weeks ago, and they even said, we thought she was crazy when she called and said that mold did this to her family. They said, we thought our daughter had lost her mind. And that's how I felt. I felt like I had lost my mind. Like, mold did this to us? There's no way, but he's saying mold did this to us, so I should look into it to just see if it really did this to us. And then it was, oh, mold did this to us. Now what? Like, how do we get better? How do we, and I didn't even know it was a taboo topic until I dove into it. Like, I thought, oh, this must be a common thing. Then if it's making me this sick, it must be common, to find out that it's not. Like, it's hard to find good doctors. It's hard to find good remediators. It's hard to find inspectors that aren't going to just try and take your money. And so I feel incredibly fortunate that we got the inspection company we did. I feel incredibly fortunate that the second doctor I found, not the fifth or the sixth, was a doctor that actually knows what she's talking about. Like, our life is so different, but, you know, I'm glad we have a very different perspective. And sometimes I wish I was still, you know, ignorantly bliss, didn't know anything about mold, but I do now. And now it's my responsibility to make sure other people don't go through what we went through. So,
you know, you talking about doctors and stuff, I will have to say this, since I recently had the doctor that wanted to do a hysterectomy on you. That was the same doctor. And
yep, it was.
And here's how I would say this is a huge blessing, because Elizabeth saw this doctor who was wanting to do a hysterectomy on her. Okay. And of course, you went back and said a lot of words to him that weren't so kind when you found out the truth, you know, because she didn't need a hysterectomy. It was mold causing all the pain. Well, years later, I just had the same doctor. And when I told him that Elizabeth was my best friend,
he said, go away, you can't see me anymore.
It was basically, because he was my OB for our pregnancy with our daughter. It was basically, whatever you want, Emily, you can do. I'm not, you know, to just, there was no pride. And I honestly credit Elizabeth for that, because she educated him on it. And I feel that her doing that has probably helped him a lot moving forward, because she's not the only one that's probably gone to him and it was mold, you know, and didn't need a hysterectomy. So
incredibly loving people, but, you know, you don't need surgery if you don't need surgery.
No, and I can't tell you how many other people, including myself, I literally would have like jumped on the table if my OB had said, okay, let's just do a hysterectomy, if I thought that that would have taken away the pain, because I was telling her that, you know, something's going on, and she was telling me everything's fine, and I was like, absolutely not, like, I'm dying. So but she was like, she wasn't like your doctor who was like, well, let's just cut you open and remove some stuff. So anyways, he's a good doctor.
Glad he's learned.
Yeah, he's learned. He's a great doctor to me. Anyways, next question though is, you know, Malachi's message is the first foundation set up to financially assist those going through mold, because the number one hurdle that we've all discovered that keeps people from recovering is they lack the means, because your home insurance, your health insurance, they don't cover mold remediation. They're not going to cover the doctors needed to treat or test you properly. You know, you have to replace contents and items. You need money for that. You need money for temporary housing. You need money for clothes and toys. And so this foundation was not set up obviously back then, but had it been, Elizabeth, how would that have changed or helped you guys?
You know, the first time we asked that question, and we thought we should include this question in the interviews, I I was overwhelmed, honestly, with trying to think through my answer on that, because it would have changed so much for us. Like the night it happened, I was crying in Walmart at 11:30 with one of my good friends because I couldn't afford the stuffy for my 1-year-old that was sitting on the shelf for $7. And I remember thinking, I wish that I had the money to do this, or I wish I could do this for her. The medical bills, like we looked back and I think the first time we saw this other doctor, it was close to 10 grand that we dished out of pocket. And a lot of that was money, you know, people had given us to help with medical bills, but it was so overwhelming. I mean, today I did the math on it the other day, and I think we spend about $600 a month on our supplements. And those are the base supplements, not if we're detoxing again, right? Not if I have to do my emergency protocol because I'm so sensitive. I have a mold allergy. I'm not just sensitive to it. My daughter actually has a mold allergy as well. So that fluctuates for us, but it's at least $600 a month for our supplements. That would have been covered, which would have been huge, right? Like I wouldn't have, our marriage would have done better those months. We wouldn't have been homeless if we could have stayed at a hotel and had Malachi's message pay the cost of the hotel for 5 months. We were homeless for 4 months. That would have given us the space to regroup and to, you know, be able to stay together, because it took a toll on our marriage at that point, and we had to work hard to come back from that. So it would have been a life changer for us easily. Clothes wouldn't have had to come from secondhand people in another state. I could have gone to the store and let my daughters pick out the clothes that they wanted, that were their style. So I'm not ungrateful for the help we got, but it's very different when you get to own it. And so it would have changed everything for us, like everything. So yeah, I mean, that's why when we talked about it originally, we're like, well, what are we going to do? We're going to make sure people don't go through that. We're going to make sure people can get the help they need. We just got a letter today, right? From one of the people we've helped, and they were talking about how they were so overwhelmed by how mold affected them physically, emotionally, mentally, and to get the check in the mail for reimbursement for their mold assessment was a game changer for them. It gave them hope, like, okay, we can make it through this. And that's why we did it. So that's how I would have felt. I would have felt overwhelmed, and I would have felt so much relief.
If there's one thing you could tell people about mold that you think that they should know, what would that one thing be?
Outside of the fact it's real. So I'm going to veer a little bit on this question. I thought a lot about it. I would say one thing I would want people to know while they're going through mold, and that's, I'm going to change a little bit, is to grieve. So I'm really big on this topic, and I think it's so important. If you can't grieve something, you're not acknowledging it, and you have to acknowledge what you're going through, and you have to figure out how to grieve it, and you have to figure out how your spouse is going to grieve and let them grieve in their way at their time. So something that, I'm a very type A person. So I remember thinking, well, my husband has to grieve this way, or he needs to do it in this time frame. And it wasn't until a few months ago that he went, man, I finally feel like I'm not in survival mode, and that I can actually start to process what has happened to our family. And we're 5 years out almost. But now he's at a point where he can do it. And there have been times where he's like, hey, I just need to drive for a few hours and clear my head, because we're in the middle of this again when we find mold in our house, or we've had a few instances where I have been rushed to the hospital again because my throat's closed. And he needs space to think through it. And I can't say, no, you can't go do that. And I can't say, well, you should have grieved 3 years ago, right? Like, he's let me grieve in my way, and I have to let him grieve in his way. And I honestly think that's partially why we've been okay and why we've made it. And I know we've talked a lot about this, but you have to grieve it. You have to acknowledge, hey, this sucks. I just lost all my kids' toys. I just lost all my kids' clothes. My kids don't have a roof over their head. That is horrible. Like, no one should go through that. That is stuff you read about when third world countries go through, like, horrible stuff. Like, people shouldn't be sleeping in tents outside their house because their house is so toxic that they can't go in it. So grieve it. Like, you have to acknowledge it. You have to acknowledge this is hard. You have to acknowledge when doctors rip you off, or when a remediation company rips you off. And that's how you move through it. Or it builds up and builds up and builds up and builds up, and it will destroy you. And if it's already trying to destroy you, don't let it. Like, mold took something from you, don't let it win. Don't let it destroy your entire journey. And if you don't grieve, it will. It will completely destroy who you are and your entire life's purpose. So you have to grieve. You have to work through it, no matter how long it takes. There are still days where I sit down and go, I'm having a really hard time with this today. There are still triggers. especially living back in the area where this happened to us, where I drove down a road the other day and I remember thinking, why am I so tense and so upset right now? Like I felt triggers coming on. And I remember thinking, oh, the apartment complex is coming up on the right-hand side. That's why my body is starting this process. So I go, you know what? Yeah, we're going to acknowledge it. It's there. I want to egg it, but I know I can't. And like, it sucks. It took a lot from my family, but I'm not going to let it win. And when my husband's need space, or my husband's, I only have one. Oh my gosh. My daughter still has an incredibly unhealthy attachment to stuffies because she lost all of them, like very unhealthy attachment. And we let her keep that one because that is the one thing for her she remembers losing because she was so little. She doesn't remember losing anything else but her stuffies. So she has an entire bunk bed full of just stuffies up top and some in storage in boxes. But that's her way of grieving, right? Like she's not ready to let go of that yet. So we let her keep it. And when she's ready, she will. So that's my biggest thing. It's what to do when you're in it. Like be able to grieve, give yourself space to grieve, give yourself grace as you're grieving because nobody knows how to do it perfectly and everyone's different.
And Elizabeth wrote an amazing piece on grief and mold that everybody should go check out. And we can post that to Malachi's message, can't we?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, we should.
Yeah, we can.
I think that literally 99% of people that go through mold, they grieve, and until they grieve, they can't let it go. And you can't move on if you haven't acknowledged something and then let it go.
Yeah, exactly.
So
yeah,
I love that you just went through all that because that is such an important part of the healing process. So Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming on and telling your story, but not only that, working your butt off to make this foundation successful and creating it and all that you do every single day for everybody that, we're helping through this foundation.
Well, thank you. It's honestly an honor. I mean, I wouldn't be here without you. And we say this all the time, but it was the right timing and the right people. And the fact that we connected the way we did when, you've been in touch with so many people too. Like it was the right thing. So I'm honored. I love it. Love doing this with you.